In a normal Calamity playthrough, you'll find yourself taking down almost all of the 44 bosses the game has to offer. With each one you defeat, you'll gain increasingly more powerful gear to take on the next. In this playthrough, that's not the case. I'm going to be trying to beat the game in as few bosses as possible, requiring a variety of particularly creative progression skips, challenging bosses that I'm woefully underprepared for, and dying an unreasonable amount of times just to claim my title as the first person to complete Calamity in under 10 bosses. Forget everything you know about Calamity progression, because I'm about to break it entirely. First things first, what do I mean by beating Calamity? Well, there's a few different ways of looking at this, but the one that makes most sense to me is defeating the final two bosses of the mod, Supreme Calamitas and the Exomechs. Since these are both on the same tier of progression, you could argue that killing only one of them is necessary, but just to be safe, I'll be taking down both. That's a long ways off though, so for now I just need to work on collecting some basic early game weapons, armour and accessories, and getting enough health that I stop dying so easily. While exploring for life crystals, I make sure to collect all the active stone blocks from any boulder traps I find. These hold the key to skipping over an entire boss later on, as they're the only way to get the wire needed for the code breaker without killing Skeletron. With my health maxed out, I'm met with perhaps the most annoying aspect of this run, the Eye of Cthulhu. Now that I'm above 200 health, this has a 1 in 3 chance of spawning every single night for the rest of the playthrough, and since it's not a required boss, I need to be ready to save and quit the game whenever it spawns. This is especially important in the endgame when I can accidentally kill it in 1 or 2 hits, ruining the run. So if the Eye of Cthulhu isn't a required boss, and neither is Skeletron, what will our first one be? Well, surprisingly, I can skip over every single boss in pre-hard mode and head straight to the Wall of Flesh. But I'm not going to be taking on the strongest boss of pre-hard mode with some puny pre-boss gear, meaning it's time to break out a classic Terraria progression skip. What you've just seen is me saving a half-digested angler from a trasher, only to immediately feed him back to another one to finish off the job. And no, this isn't some protest against the angler's infuriating quest system. It's because Calamity makes the angler drop a golden fishing rod if it's killed by a trasher. And why do I want the golden fishing rod? Well, that's to get the Reaver Shark, which Calamity also makes a change to, bringing it back to its glorious 100% pickaxe power, and allowing it to once again mine Hellstone just like it always should have. Before I can get my hands on one, however, I'm rudely interrupted by a blood moon, and soon after that, a goblin invasion. Once I've dealt with these pesky green boys, I get back to fishing at the sulphurous sea for the Reaver Shark, and thankfully, it doesn't take long for me to reel one in. So let's get started on some real progress. After a successful trip to the underworld, I've gathered enough hellstone to craft pretty much every weapon available. At this point, I was thinking of using the Cauldron for the Wall of Flesh, as it receives a whopping 80% mana reduction while submerged in lava or in the underworld, which, as luck would have it, is exactly where I'll have to fight the Wall of Flesh. To get the most out of this weapon though, I'd need some mage armour, and without killing any bosses, the best balance of defence and damage would come from the jungle set. I set up some housing on the surface so I can easily teleport over with a pylon, then delve into the underground jungle in search of materials. While I'm looting, one of my minions' projectiles ends up hitting a larva and spawning the queen bee. This is another boss that I'll have to be wary of, as weapons that attack through blocks can spawn one at any time, and just like with the Eye of Cthulhu, accidentally killing one of these will ruin the run. At some point I randomly decide to dig to the right and stumble upon the Shimmer, which is potentially the single most important find in this low percent run. Shimmer will allow me to skip over Skeletron, a mechanical boss, Plantera, the Profaned Guardians, and the Profaned Goddess Providence herself, for a grand total of 5 skip bosses, all because of this one beautiful liquid. For now though, its biggest use is giving me some permanent upgrades and allowing me to reforge crafted items without spending my precious coins. And let me tell you, you don't realise how much you rely on bosses for money until you can't fight any of them. After crafting my armour and a magnet flower, I was finally ready to start building my Wall of Flesh arena. While doing so, a demon drops the Bladecrest Oath Sword. I didn't think much of it at the time, but this would end up changing my entire strategy for the Wall of Flesh. Speaking of, when I'm almost done with the Hell Bridge, I accidentally spawn it, so take this as an opportunity to test my weapons. The Cauldron deals great damage, but its slow speed and the fact that it's affected by gravity makes it hard to aim. On the other hand, the Bladecrest Oath Sword that just dropped has homing projectiles that travel through blocks, so I can focus much more on dodging and less on aiming, allowing me to survive a lot longer. I end up switching to this and craft a set of molten armour to go with it, then spawn the Wall of Flesh again to see how far I need to expand my bridge. By the time I'd reached the end of it, the wall was at around a quarter health, and while I could have given up and expanded the bridge further, some part of me thought I might actually be able to beat it. Almost immediately I got stuck in a building and lost half my health and my adrenaline, but I wasn't going to give up that easily. As I dodged through the buildings, both my own and the wall's health got lower and lower, until with one final blast of rage, this happened. I think I might have actually done it. I have. Wow, I was not expecting that on that run, to be honest. With the Wall of Flesh defeated, this challenge is about to get a lot harder, and I'm going to need the best gear possible if I have any hope against the next boss. We'll get into exactly what boss that is a little later, but for now I have to give a quick overview of the Calamity hard mode or rework. This essentially locks the second and third tier of hard mode ores behind defeating the mechanical bosses. After defeating your first mech, you get access to Mithril and Orichalcum, then after your second you'll get Titanium and Adamantite. This is all well and good in a normal Calamity playthrough, but I think we've covered that this one is far from normal. I could disable this rework, as Calamity adds a toggle to bring back the vanilla behaviour. But what do you take me for, a casual? No, I'll be proceeding with the rework enabled, which means I'll have to get my hard mode ores through other means. Now before you leave a comment below saying I could have gotten ores from crates, first of all, click the subscribe button while you're down there, and secondly, this is considered a bug in the current version of Calamity, so I won't be using it in this playthrough, meaning for now I'm stuck with Cobalt and Palladium. Thankfully, Palladium Armour's healing ability is actually pretty good, but I'll need a fresh set of accessories to go along with it. First on that list is a set of wings, so after committing atrocities against the local pixie population, I take to the skies to farm wyverns for souls of flight. This also happens to be the place where I can get a very powerful weapon in the form of the Storm Saber. This sword has a 20% drop chance from cloud elementals, so I was pleasantly surprised to see it drop from the first one I killed. After crafting fairy wings at home, I dive into the sunken sea in search of mollusk husks. You'd usually get plenty of these by defeating the giant clam and its minions, but since I haven't defeated the desert scourge in this world, the giant clam won't spawn, meaning instead I have to farm the rather rare naturally spawning clams. With enough time and patience, I gather the husks needed to craft the deep diver, which is the only dash accessory currently available in this run. I round out my accessories with a pair of fairy boots to match my wings, a giant tortoise shell for knockback immunity and defense, and in the final 2 slots I use a Charm of Myths and Grand Gelatin, which synergize very well together to provide excellent survivability. With all of these reforged to warding, I was about as powerful as I could get before fighting the next boss. So, which boss will that be? So far in the run I haven't really explained much about the route I'll be taking, and I think it's time to change that. Let's start with what we'll need for the exomechs and work our way back. To summon these juiced up versions of the mechs, you first need to complete the Codebreaker multi-block, which is made up of 6 distinct items crafted like so. Some notable materials from this are wires, life alloy, coarse velium, mithril/orichalcum, and then all of these post-Moonlord materials that I'll get into later. Wire, as I covered earlier, will be obtained by shimmering the active stone found as part of boulder traps. Life alloy and coarse velium can be obtained in many ways, but the most efficient way in a low percent run is to kill 2 birds with 1 bloodstone by taking down Ravager for them both. For mithril and orichalcum we will once again have to rely on the magic of shimmer. If I throw in a higher tier ore such as scoria or chlorophyte, I can work my way down through each tier until I get to orichalcum. As for Supreme Calamitas, I'll have to use Ashes of Calamity at an Altar of the Accursed to spawn her. And thankfully, the only additional boss I'll need to take down for this is the Calamitas clone. Surprisingly, that's all the materials I really need from hard mode bosses, so I guess it's time to go kill the clone and Ravager. Well, not exactly. You see, in the current version of Calamity, the spawn items for both of these bosses requires a Mithril or Orichalcum Anvil, which, as I covered earlier, I don't have access to. This means that my only possible path through hard mode is to literally just skip it, by heading straight to the Lunatic Cultist and shortly after that, the Moonlord. But there's no way I could skip all the way to those bosses, right? My gear is beyond underpowered for two of the final bosses of hard mode, and besides, the Lunatic Devotees will only spawn if I've killed Skeletron and Golem, which would add an extra 2 bosses to the run, so that's out of the question. Well, what if I told you we could also skip over the Lunatic Devotees, and summon the Lunatic Cultist directly?
Deep within the abyss lie the discarded test subjects of the Dragon Cult. Once men, these tortured souls were subject to grotesque experimentation in an effort to create the ultimate predator. Dark magic twisted their bodies into something unrecognizable, corrupting their very souls as their minds fell into madness. Abandoned by the Order, these idolists drift through the depths in search of a new master. And some say that in the dark recesses of the void, they found one.
Releasing these creatures from their life of torment brings me no joy, but it is essential if I'm to continue on my journey, for in their possession lies an obscure item that most players would never come across in a playthrough. In this one, however, it is the key to future progress, as this ancient relic holds within it the power to summon the Lunatic Cultist. Okay, so dodging isn't going great so far. These first few fights really made me feel my lack of gear, and I could tell this was going to take many attempts. I also had to spend more time farming for potions in this run, as no Skeletron means no alchemy table, making every potion I craft more expensive. On top of potions, I also used some Drunk Princess brews to further optimise my build. Then lastly, I equipped the Aether Monolith in a vanity slot so I could see projectiles more easily. This was one of many suggestions given by Bone Reaper in my stream chat, who is likely the only reason I made it this far in the run. With that, all I could do was grind out attempts and hope for an eventual win. Oh my god, I was not expecting that. It's the most difficult Lunatic Cultist has ever been, to be honest. Turns out all you need to make Lunatic Cultist hard is to beat him as the first boss in hard mode. That's all. With the cultist defeated, I was one step closer to my goal, and as I looked out at the lunar pillars across my world, it was hard to believe I'd made it this far in just 2 bosses. While the Storm Saber served me well against the cultist, I was going to need something much stronger to take down the Moonlord. And other than the vanilla weapons you're all familiar with, the pillars also unlock a few new options from Calamity. The first of these requires Aerialite, which you'd usually only get access to after defeating the Hivemind or Perforators. With Shimmer, however, we can sidestep this requirement entirely by transmuting Cobalt into Aerialite, which then gets crafted into the Windblade and combined with my Storm Saber and some Vortex fragments to make the Storm Ruler. On top of this, I craft the Entropic Claymore from some Meld Blobs, then use these to take down the remaining pillars, granting me access to all the vanilla pillar weapons along with better healing potions. Unfortunately, these are really the only upgrades I can get before fighting the Moonlord, meaning I'll have to take down the hardest boss in vanilla using some Palladium armor and Fairy Wings. It should therefore come as no surprise that I end up failing my first attempt, which is where we get into one of the other annoying side effects of doing a low percent run. It turns out the Celestial Sigil only works after Golem has been defeated, meaning each time I lose this fight I'll have to go through the entire process of defeating the Lunatic Cultist and all of the pillars just to get back to where I was. For that reason, I try to make sure my next attempt will be the final one, by massively expanding my arena. Aside from the lackluster defense, damage, mobility and skill, this seemed to be the biggest issue in the last fight. I also take some time to build a mob farm in the underground layer, as this will be used to get some rare drops after Moonlord that are required for progression. With the farm finished, I take down the cultist into pillars once again and summon the Moonlord, this time using the Rod of Discord to dodge the Death Laser attack. Before any of you say I didn't farm for this, you're right, I didn't, since in Calamity you can literally just buy it from the wizard. Unfortunately it doesn't make any difference though, as the rest of the attacks still deal more than enough damage to kill me. I'm then thrown back to the cultist yet again, and while this fight is a whole lot easier with my new pillar weapons, it's still a rather annoying inconvenience. After another tour of the pillars, I find myself losing to the Moonlord once again. Feeling demotivated, I ended my stream and started theorising ways I could get stronger. But no matter how long I spent, I couldn't find anything better than what I already had. It seems that whatever I was looking for couldn't be found on the wiki. It could only be found within. What I needed wasn't better armour, wings or weapons. What I really needed was to get good. Defeating Moonlord brings the first opportunity for some real upgrades since early hard mode, and all thanks to the Luminite he drops. Due to the importance of this ore, my first action is to get more of it, which I do by crafting a nebula pickaxe and flying to the new planetoids. With this new influx of ore, I craft a set of solar armour, a massive upgrade over the palladium set I've had on for so long. Aside from the better damage, defense and regeneration, this set also provides a recharging shield which increases damage reduction and allows the player to dash, making it one of the most useful armour sets for the rest of the game. It also matches the orange theme I've accidentally been going for ever since Molten Armour, so I craft a pair of solar wings to double down. Aside from armour and wings, Luminite also unlocks a new weapon called the Great Sword of Judgment. With all of these upgrades, I was actually feeling quite strong for the first time in this playthrough, so it's time to test that strength by doubling back to fight the Ravager that we skipped earlier. To do this, I first head to the Abyss to mine up some scoria ore for throwing in the Shimmer. While I could have used Luminite for this, I chose to save it in case I needed it later. By working my way down through the ore tiers, I end up with just enough titanium to craft a forge and just enough orichalcum to craft an anvil, which I can then use to craft the temple key with the recipe added by Calamity. Now I know what you're thinking, I could have just used a Hoik to get in here, but I wanted to do this run as legitimately as possible, meaning no abusing any glitches or unintended mechanics to move forward. Inside the temple, I get the lizard bricks and solar tablet fragments needed to craft the death whistle, allowing me to finally spawn Ravager. With the Ravager being a hard mode boss and the fact that I have post Moonlord gear, the only way I could possibly lose this fight was overconfidence or lack of skill. I'll let you decide which one's which. When I eventually get into the groove of the fight, I take down Ravager quite a few times, as his drops are especially helpful in this playthrough. First off is the Infernal Blood. which is the only upgrade I can get to my rage or adrenaline in this playthrough, as the rest of them come from bosses that'll be skipped. Most of the weapons are heavily outclassed by this stage, but act as the first quick and renewable source of money in the playthrough. The accessories, however, are much more useful, with the flesh totem having contact damage on a 20-second cooldown, and the blood pact increasing my max health and the health from potions by 25%. Lastly, and much more importantly, are the flesh geode ravager drops. When opened, these provide many ingredients that are essential to progression, acting as the only source of cryonic bars along with cores of sunlight, havoc and helium. However, to craft these into the core of Calamity needed to fight Supreme Calamitas, one of the final bosses of Calamity that drops the Calamity, we still need the ashes of Calamity dropped by the Calamitas clone. You know, I'm starting to think that Calamity might be a little too obsessed with the sound of its own name. While the Cal clone's summon item is now craftable thanks to our shiny new Oracle command ball, I decided to save it for even later in the playthrough, as doing so would allow me to also achieve a full Exomex low percent along the way. That means that there are two options for my next boss fight, the Devourer of Gods or Yaren. I decided to go with the Devourer first, as it's earlier than Yaren in progression, so presumably a lot easier, right? To defeat a foe as formidable as the Devourer, we'll need a weapon powerful enough to match its strength, and since this is a low percent run, our options are severely limited. In fact, without killing any more bosses, there's only one possible option that stands well above the rest, the Stellar Striker. Now while this sword may be my best and probably only chance at a victory, it certainly has its drawbacks. First of which is that it requires meteorite bars to craft, leading me on an hour-long goose chase trying to find the things in gold chests near the underworld. After failing this, I remember that meteorite bars could also be found in astral crates, leading me on yet another hour-long goose chase of completing quests to increase my fishing power. After which, I can finally reel in my meteor bars in relative peace. The Stellar Striker also requires ectoplasm, and since I haven't killed Plantera, my only source of this comes once again from the Ravager, as the cores it drops can be decrafted into ectoplasm and the corresponding essence. I come across a slight problem when trying to shimmer these, as the cores float much like souls do, but this can be resolved by making a bottomless shimmer bucket and using some bubble blocks to hold it back. Finally, with the right ingredients, I'm able to craft the Comet Quasher and then combine it with some Luminite bars to make the Stellar Striker, the one weapon that may just be strong enough to take down the Devourer. To take it down I first need to spawn it though, and the Devourer of Gods summon item requires a material called Necroplasm that would usually be found in the dungeon. However, since I haven't killed Skeletron, the dungeon doesn't spawn anything other than Dungeon Guardians, meaning the easiest source for this is the very rare overloaded soldiers that spawn in the underground lair. This takes me back to the mob farm I constructed just before taking down the Moonlord. I spent so long here trying to get just a single piece of necroplasm that I was beginning to think it wasn't actually possible. Maybe I had built the farm wrong, or there was a bug that prevented them from spawning or something. But then, just as I was about to give up on the entire playthrough... Oh yes! I got some. We're good, it's possible, they're just rare. It takes a long time for me to build up the 40 necroplasm needed for the Cosmic Worm, and even longer to build a sizable surplus for crafting other items further down the line, but after more than 3 hours I managed to gather just over 100 of them, letting me finally craft the Cosmic Worm and summon the Devourer. I mentioned earlier that the Stellar Striker was my best bet against the Devourer, but its strength comes at a cost. This thing is a true melee weapon, meaning to benefit from its high damage output I have to get right up next to the Devourer and pray that I don't get hit. With all these attempts I was burning through potions fast, and while other YouTubers may use quality of life mods to ensure this isn't an issue, we do things a little differently here by actually playing the game. So restocking each potion takes time. A lot of time in fact. But that time acts as the perfect break for my brain to solidify the learning from the first batch of attempts, allowing me to return to the fight stronger than ever. With enough practice, I was consistently getting to the final phase, and while it still wasn't quite enough to win, I could feel my confidence growing with each loss. It was only a matter of time, for while I had seen the Devourer's final phase, it hadn't seen mine. Yes! Oh! How many attempts? How many attempts was that? Boss log 171. Oh, so under 200 at least. With the Devourer defeated, it was time to gear up for the endgame. The treasure bag contains many new weapons and the Cosmolite bars needed to make more. But to get into the real upgrades, I'll first have to take down a few events, starting with the Frost Moon.
How are you? I am under the water. Please help me.
Endothermic energy allows me to upgrade my Great Sword of Judgment into the Order Bringer, then it's straight into the Solar Eclipse for Dark Sun fragments. On their own, these are kinda useless until I've taken down the Pumpkin Moon, but this one is a little trickier in a low percent run. The spawn item requires pumpkins that you would usually get by planting seeds bought from the Dryad, only since I haven't taken down the Eye of Cthulhu, Skeletron or an evil boss, there is no Dryad to buy them from. I'd rather not wait for Halloween and delay this video another 2 months, so I'll have to rely on yet another niche mechanic to get my pumpkins. And if you guessed I was going to tear apart fish until I find some pumpkin seeds in their digestive system, then you'd be absolutely correct. Stuffed fish can be caught on the surface during the day and are mostly seen as an alternative way to get herbs, but what you may not know is that they also have a chance of containing pumpkin seeds. And at a 5% drop rate, I'll only have to fish up an average of 20 to get the seeds I need. It took an hour straight of fishing and over 100 stuffed fish to finally get the pumpkin seeds. But on the bright side, I also gathered plenty of titanium crates, which will be used to skip over another 2 bosses. After a little bit of growing, I harvest the pumpkins, craft the pumpkin medallion, and summon the pumpkin moon. With the Nightmare Fuel dropped by the event, I can finally craft Ascendant Spirit Essence for some major upgrades. But first, it's time to grind for yet another item, one that manages to completely destroy the pace of my own and many others' playthroughs despite being available in pre-hard mode. Yes, that's right, it's time to farm for the Rover Drive. I swear it would take less time to get a Rod of Discord with a calming potion and peace candle than it does to get one of these. And sure, I could have farmed for it in pre-hard mode when Wolfram enemies were much more common, But back then I wasn't really thinking about how I was going to craft a single item so far down the line that I'd taken down a cosmic being that eats gods for breakfast. And I don't think I'm alone in that sentiment. If any of the Calamity developers are watching this, then please, from the bottom of my heart, consider adding another way to get the rover drive. I'm not exaggerating when I say this took over an hour and a half to get. And from all the recipes you add for vanilla items, I'm sure this isn't the kind of quote-unquote gameplay that you want to encourage. Either way, with the rover drive and some Ascendant Spirit Essence, I can finally craft the sponge, one of the best survivability accessories in the game. I also take down Ravager a few more times to get the Revengeance exclusive accessories I need to make the Occult Skull crown. Then craft the best mobility option available at this point, Silver Wings. With all of these upgrades, I return to farm the Devourer for more Cosmolite, which is now significantly quicker and easier thanks to my new weapons and gear, to the point that I can defeat 5 of them in the time it takes for one set of buffs to run out. The new influx of Cosmolite allows me to craft a full set of Godslayer armour for some better stat boosts at the expense of the Solar Dash, so for now I'm stuck with the dash from the Ornate Shield. It's then time to get to work on an arena for Yaren, and while building one of the side walls, the playthrough takes a dark turn. Although, I don't know how... Oh god, oh god, oh god, oh god. Shit. No. Oh, that was close. Oh, that was close. I almost screwed that up there. When I get back into the game, the first thing I do is check the boss log to see that thankfully, I didn't actually defeat the Queen Bee. Upon reviewing the footage though, I got within just 261 HP of throwing the entire run, which is way too close for comfort. I very cautiously return to excavating the arena, but that caution gets thrown out of the window as soon as Bone Reaper suggests using the SDMG with mortar rounds to speed up the process, which works a charm. After that I summon Yaren a few times to get the exact location I need to build the right side wall of the arena. But wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. I haven't even covered me getting Yaren's spawn item, have I? Well, that goes back to my many deaths against the Devourer. After a few dozen too many of these, I decided to give Yaren a try instead, whose spawn item requires a combination of life alloy and effulgent feathers. I could easily get the life alloy from Ravager, but as for the effulgent feathers, I needed to spend roughly a day and a half plucking them from a very rare enemy found in the jungle. Normally you'd get plenty of these from Dragon Folly, but of course Dragon Folly is a boss, and therefore defeating it would add another one to my total, so unfortunately the playthrough once again relies on even more mindless grinding. Once I collected enough feathers, I crafted the Blessed Phoenix Egg and gave Yaren a couple of tries. These didn't go anywhere of course, otherwise you wouldn't see this as a flashback, but instead it's a triumphant montage of me defeating Yaren before the Devourer. So let's jump back to the future to get into a real attempt. Now that's a bit more like it. It may not have been a win, but 6% on the first attempt sure ain't bad. Let's see where this goes. Okay, 10% is pretty good. I'm sure I've got it in the bag on the next one. Ooh, 7.8. A little better than the last, but still not quite there. %. That one kinda hurts, I'm not gonna lie. It gets even worse, 2%. I could have sneezed on him in one. I'm not really sure what happened here. Let's just swiftly move on to the next. Defeating Yaren causes auric ore to generate throughout the world. However, this can only be mined with a blossom pickaxe, which requires Juley Bloom to craft. So we need Juley Bloom ore to get auric ore, unless we could instead use auric ore to get Juley Bloom ore. That's where those titanium crates from earlier come into play. After defeating Yaren, these have a chance to contain auric ore, so instead of having to take down the Profaned Guardians and Providence to get Juley Bloom, I can just open the backlog of crates I've been hoarding. Auric ore would usually unlock massive upgrades, with many powerful weapons and some of the best armour and accessories in the game. In this playthrough, however, I get none of that. In fact, auric ore only really gives me one upgrade, that being the Dragon Fruit, the final and as a matter of fact only health upgrade I can get from Calamity. Instead, the main use for auric ore is shimmering it into Juley Bloom ore, meaning I actually can craft the Blossom Pickaxe, letting me mine more auric ore whenever I need it. Juley Bloom also unlocks the Badge of Bravery, an excellent melee accessory, and the Dark Sun Ring, granting boosts to many player stats. At this point, I'd inadvertently used melee for every single boss, so it only makes sense to continue that for the final stretch. Since I can't use auric ore to make any melee weapons, my upgrades will have to come from Yaren himself, which ends up being a lot more difficult than I expected. Regardless, after a few deaths I finally get the Dragon Rage, one of the best true melee weapons in the game. If I have any hope against the Exos though, I'll need some way to deal damage from a distance, so it's straight back to farming Yaren another half dozen times, not counting the deaths, to get the second drop I wanted, the Burning Sky. Now, the only thing standing between myself and the Exomechs is the Codebreaker, and as long as I haven't missed anything in my plan, I should now be able to craft each component. The Codebreaker base, using materials from Draydon's lab. The decryption computer, made with wires salvaged from boulder traps. The long-range sensor, with freshly shimmered mithril bars. The advanced display, crafted with life alloy from the Ravager. The voltage regulation system, using luminite from the Moonlord at a station dropped by the lunatic cultist. Lastly, the auric quantum cooling cell, featuring cores of helium from Ravager, auric bars from Yaren, and endothermic energy from the Frost Moon, all coming together at a cosmic anvil from the Devourer of Gods. When combined, these components allow me to summon the Exomechs. After many unsuccessful attempts, I expand my arena even further to make space for my movement pattern. Once it seems big enough, I get straight back into attempts. Expanding my arena clearly wasn't working, so something else had to change, and my only upgrade could come in the form of the Cosmic Discharge, a rare weapon from the Devourer that tears through Ares. After many kills, I managed to finally get the drop, which means it's time to take down the Exomechs for good. Oh, thank goodness. Whew. Let's get auto pause back off. Oh, that is a relief. Oh, that feels good. That feels good. And there we have it. The Exomechs defeated in just 7 bosses. But the playthrough's not over yet. In order to spawn Calamitas, we'll first have to take down her clone, so I cook up some Hellstone bars to craft the Eye of Desolation, then use my drops from the Exomechs to absolutely demolish the Cal clone. Ashes of Calamity grant access to our final upgrade of the playthrough, the Asgard's Valor. This mid-hard mode dash would usually be thoroughly outclassed at this point, but in this run it's the best we could get. So after crafting the Altar of the Accursed, I spawn the 9th and final boss of Calamity. Yeah, I have no idea what I'm doing here, but it seems to work. Okay, just try not to get hit here. And I got hit there. I think we've got it. And that's it. Calamity in under 10 bosses. Let's just triple check that. Okay, so first boss, Wall of Flesh. Calamitas Clone, that's 2. Ravager's 3. Lunatic Cultist is 4. Moonlord is 5. Devourer of Gods is 6, Yaren 7, Exomechs 8, Supreme Calamitas 9. I want to say a massive thank you to anyone that made it this far into the video, especially my patrons that you can see on screen now. This is without a doubt the most work I've put into a video, and I really hope it shows in the final product. In fact, it's the only creation of mine I'd consider adding full movie to the end of if it wasn't so cringe. If you enjoyed it and want to support the channel, then consider joining my Patreon using the link below. If not, then liking the video, leaving a comment, and subscribing are all massively helpful in their own right. If you're looking for almost the exact opposite of this playthrough, then I'd recommend checking out this video here, where instead of avoiding bosses, they're quite literally the only way I can get better gear.